Good day, everyone. So it's been a couple of weeks since the supposed Genshin boycott, and that absolutely went nowhere because the latest gacha revenue figures seem to indicate that Genshin has brought in about 69 million US dollars in terms of revenue for China. Now, whilst some of you might doubt the figures, even if we assume you only have about less than half of that, let's make up a number 30 million. That is still 30 million that Genshin would have gotten in, which is absolutely insane. So, what happened to the supposed boycott? Well, I can tell you that nothing happened to it precisely because it did not grow organically. You see, when you have someone like Tectone calling for the boycott of a game in which he doesn't even really actively play, you're in a bit of a weird situation. On the one hand, calling for drama and sending a video to the Chinese players and having it be a big little affair means that he gets views. And even in the event that the boycott is successful and the game does change, he's also going to win because he can come back and he can play the game and get views. If nothing happens, he can keep on complaining about the game and get views. It's almost like there are really no stakes involved, but if you as a player decide to stop playing Genshin Impact and you're not someone that actually even really spends, you've been mostly F2P, well, it's going to cost you in terms of your progression. You're going to lose out on Primo Gems. There's going to be a tangible cost to you as someone that loves the game, and supposedly with a boycott, there should be a cost on the people doing the boycott, and that cost should also then be felt equally on the company or the thing that they're boycotting. In this case, that scenario never transpired, and hence the whole thing fell apart. In fact, I found it incredibly funny that there was this big push for a boycott, only for it to devolve into a big creator drama, which, to their credit, once again means that all of them get a lot of views, a good little paycheck, just like Genshin for the months of January and February. And where we are as players as well, we're asked to join the boycott, play Honkai Star Rail so that the devs can know that that is the better game and they should do what that game is doing. But it's just not working that way. You see, there is something that a lot of people don't talk about, and it's got nothing to do with players' attitudes or how the company treats their players and stuff. It's got to do with what happens internally with Hoyo. And this rests upon the idea of performance metrics. If you have a game like Genshin and Honkai Star Rail, each one of these games has a certain fixed cost and they've got developer cost, so you would appropriately give the sales and the marketing team some performance goal in terms of revenue that they should bring in. So as long as the company can reach those minimum thresholds and they can do it consistently and comfortably, there is no real material risk for them to change anything. Why would they introduce mechanics in Genshin when there's no financial incentive to do so? We've seen with the Lantern Rite and the recent events that we've gotten poorer quality of combat events. We've gotten events that aren't as interesting as they were in the past. We haven't gotten as many new, fun, fresh mini games. All of these things are dampening the development cost, but they still bring in quite a handsome amount of revenue, like I pointed out in the beginning. So what this really means is that there is no impetus to change whatsoever. When Zhongli came out way back when, the game was still fresh and a lot of people spent on the Zhongli banner because he was supposed to represent the god Morax. And what happened is that because a lot of players were unhappy, they were within the 6-month window to do a lot of chargebacks, and that really puts a lot of pressure on Hoyo, because if I think it's WorldPay, the payment processor, and suddenly all of the MasterCard and Visa holders and everyone is just like giving and asking for refunds, I'm going to be in a situation where I might actually physically cancel my relationship with Hoyo, which won't even affect Genshin, but all of their other games. So the whole Zhongli Gate thing was really, really serious because it actually gave Hoyo a proper financial fright. Unfortunately, we're now in a case where people aren't threatening refunds, which would be a much more sensible thing to do than just stop playing the game. But we're now in a situation where Genshin has so much pervasive market share that even if people do stop playing, there are more than enough casual and returnee players that are going to make up for the lost revenue. You see, a traditional gacha game is carried by its whales, because in terms of the cost to revenue, those whales make up a bigger proportion of the player base. But with Genshin, because you've got such a huge player base, it's effectively the dolphins and the low like spenders, or the people that just occasionally buy things just as a one-off purchase, that are effectively carrying the game. It's not whales carrying the game. If it did, we would have already seen them make a dent with the fact that as whale players, there is nothing for them to use their characters and their accounts on. So I'm totally convinced that when the marketing team looks at the performance metrics, they're looking at Genshin and be like, yeah, this is doing good. And they're probably looking at Honkai Star Rail saying, man, you guys have exceeded all your performance metrics by a ton. You know what? If you want to build up a bit of goodwill and give out a free character, yeah, it's going to hurt a couple of the sales, but you know what? It's something we are prepared to take a gamble on. And it makes sense. Honkai Star Rail is in a turn-based gacha genre. That is one of the most competitive gacha markets out there. So for them to keep themselves at the top and probably meet their minimum thresholds, it makes sense that they want to build a bit of goodwill. They want to treat their audience differently because they have a different audience than the Genshin audience. Now, this doesn't in any way excuse why Genshin treats their players so badly in comparison to Honkai Star Rail and why they're not trying to build up some goodwill. It doesn't excuse a lot of the lack of quality of life. Don't get me mistaken on any of this. There are legitimate reasons why we need to be treated as well as the Honkai Star Rail players, but I can honestly imagine that there is no real pressure on the company to make that change, and this boycott was just one of those things that once again proved to Hoyo that they don't need to change it, because any call to action, any review bombing, ultimately is just going to be cancelled out in the long run. Nothing happened with Daya, and a lot of people were upset with Daya, myself included, and unfortunately Hoyo learned from that all you need to do is just keep on making games, keep on making mini games, and people are still going to buy it. So what do we have? At the end of the day, we are called to boycott the games we like playing. That's not going to have any real effect, so that the content creators that are calling for the boycott are going to rake in a big number of views. This is just led to a snowball situation in which the people that genuinely do boycott the game and think they're actually going to do something is just not doing anything at all. My preferred way of playing the game and my preferred piece of advice to players is to keep on playing, but keep on giving feedback. Don't spend, make them bleed in terms of server cost. And I think I must just address this idea of Tectone that Genshin wants to look good in front of investors, so they look at active player counts. That's a big bunch of bullshit. That is not how companies look at it. There are a ton of performance metrics and scores of like variables that investors look at. They don't just look at active player counts. They don't just look at these things. They look at cost. They look at all of the financials in a lot of detail. There's so many more analytics that it just makes it's when someone that knows nothing about business attempts to sound like he knows something about it, makes these wild statements, that just makes me really, really mad. And I'm talking from experience. I mean, I work for a company that's literally 10 times the size of Hoyo, and when it came to defining these performance metrics for our investment teams, I can promise you we had a lot of debate, a lot of foresight, a lot of thought in terms of how the metrics we're designing is going to affect how people see us in the market, how it's going to affect the fairness towards customers, how it's going to affect the pricing points, the basis points we charge for the assets under management. There is so much thought that goes into these things. But in any case, we can perhaps talk about that in a separate video. From my side, what it really comes down to is that whatever they've got going on internally, they're still happy with it, and that's why we're not seeing change. The only way you can truly affect proper change is to either leave the game completely, all of Hoyo's games, or to keep on playing and bleed them out on server cost. That is the only way, and to just for heaven's sake stop spending, because $69 million, or let's assume it's $30 million for the month of January, just means that people are still happy with the game as is. Alright, that is my take for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and see you again.